Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
Summer's here, and it's time to treat yourself at Torrid. Whether you're headed to a barbecue or back to work, Torrid has it all for summer and beyond. Shop our life-changing bras, sexy swimwear, bombshell jeans, and softest tees ever. All designed to fit your curves perfectly. So refresh your wardrobe from head to toe and save up to 50% off during our semi-annual sale. Happening now at your local Torrid store and online at torrid.com.
Sirius Black, Part 5.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Will the Real Weird Sisters please stand up? We're gonna have a problem here. We're the Weird Sisters, we're the Real Weird Sisters. All you other Weird Sisters are fine, but not the victors. Will the Real Weird Sisters please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up.
Hi, and welcome to the Real Weird Sisters. I'm Martha.
And I'm Alice.
And today we're here, Alice, to finally properly eulogize Sirius Black. Are you excited?
I cannot believe we have not yet had a chance to properly eulogize Sirius. And this is going to be the one podcast where we're not saying we'll get the chance to properly eulogize him on the next show.
We are going to actually finally properly eulogize Sirius. It's been a long, long time coming, but we are here today to properly eulogize this man. And what we mean by that, in case this is your first time listening or you didn't listen to our long discussion of properly eulogizing Sirius last week or whatever, we're going to be discussing Sirius and his impact on Harry and the rest of the characters after his death. So this includes the last couple chapters of Order of the Phoenix, moments in Half-Blood Prince and moments in Deathly Hallows, including memories, including the Resurrection Stone, including just mentions of Sirius and kind of Harry's grief over him. So Sirius scenes are not really going to be aplenty in this scene or in this episode, but we're going to be doing a lot of discussion of sort of his lasting legacy and his impact on Harry specifically.
Yeah. So, first of all, I kind of hope that this isn't their first episode joining us. This would be a very strange choice.
It would be.
I've never listened to this podcast, so I'm going to jump in at Sirius Black Part 5. But that made me think, if this is anybody's first Real Weird Sisters episode, I do want to hear from you. So please reach out.
Yeah, please.
That would absolutely crack me up. So
let's begin. Dearly beloved, we are here to mourn the death of a wonderful man.
Yeah, we're going to host a memorial service here today.
Well, we're here to properly eulogize him, aren't we?
We are.
We're going to bring in the man with the reedy voice who said stuff at Dumbledore's funeral. But we're going to start, like I said, with just some moments in Order of the Phoenix. We have a couple conversations that Harry has with different people after Sirius's death. And Harry's grief is very palpable in these last few chapters of the book. So we decided to save those, instead of talking about them last week, save those for this week in our eulogy episode. Then we have quite a few moments in Half-Blood Prince to talk about. And then we have some, especially memories and the Resurrection Stone scene for Sirius in Deathly Hallows to talk about. So this is our final Sirius character study. If you haven't listened to the last 4, highly recommend starting with those before you jump in with Part 5. But again, please let us know if this was your first episode. Very, very doubtful that there would be anybody in that shape. But
welcome, old listeners and new.
Yeah, lots of new, I'm sure. Alice, are we ready to get into it?
I think so. I just wanted to say, I was actually really surprised to see just how much Sirius comes up in these last 3 books, or after he dies. So the last 2 books and the whole rest of the 5th book. I guess the rest of the 5th book doesn't surprise me. That makes sense. But it's kind of just, I don't know. It really shows his legacy of how much of an impact he made on the series, to see how much he does come up.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because the other deaths that we see in the series, I mean, we have Cedric in the fourth book, obviously, and we have Dumbledore in the sixth book. For Cedric, there's not as many mentions from book 5, 6, and 7, although there are quite a few after his death. With Cedric, it's a little bit different. Then we have with Dumbledore, he has a big impact on the seventh book because of, the life and lives of Albus Dumbledore and then King's Cross and stuff like that. But we don't really have pretty much all the other important deaths in the series happen in the seventh book, so we don't really get to see Harry dealing with the loss of other characters the way that we do with Sirius most of all, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So like we said, we're going to start with the Order of the Phoenix. And the first scene I wanted to talk about is the conversation Harry has with Hagrid. So Harry's kind of lost. This is in chapter 38, the Second War begins. He's sort of feeling really isolated from his friends. He doesn't really know it says when he's with people, he wants to be alone. And when he's alone, he wants to be with people. So he decides to go to Hagrid's hut. And Hagrid's kind of being chatty about Grop, and then he finally looks at Harry and says, I knew Sirius longer than you did. He died in battle, and that's the way he'd have wanted to go.
Right. And Hagrid here, I think his intentions are good. And I think he's trying to, be comforting to Harry, and I totally get what he's doing. But Harry does not respond positively to this. It's not at all what Harry wants to hear. And so Hagrid's kind of putting his foot in his mouth. He's not helping Harry the way he thinks he is.
Yeah, Harry responds, he didn't want to go at all. And Hagrid, nah, I don't reckon he did. But still, Harry, he was never one to sit around at home and let other people do the fighting. He couldn't have lived with himself if he hadn't gone to help. So I do agree, like, what he's saying here is pretty real, and it's not like he's making up. He's not saying that like he's in a better place now or that kind of thing to try to comfort Harry. But Harry responds, like you said, he just kind of jumps up and says, I'm going to go visit Ron and Hermione. And Hagrid looks upset, and then that's kind of the end.
Yeah, so I mean, I can understand both of their perspectives. I think Harry's just not really ready to talk about it at all yet.
Yeah, agreed.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, was Hagrid just supposed to not say a word about it? Like, I don't know. I guess I can kind of relate to Hagrid here, because I feel like maybe not necessarily just when it comes to death or anything, but like sometimes with hard topics, I feel like I end up like just kind of talking a lot, like spinning my wheels, and then the other person is like just staring at me.
Yeah, well, it says here that Harry was determined to keep the conversation moving away from Sirius, but he doesn't really try here. Like he starts a conversation of saying like, where have you been? He's trying to not talk about himself, but it seems like Hagrid wants to address Harry here. And the thing is, it's awkward and, tragic about this conversation too, is that Hagrid had a relationship with Sirius too, and we don't really know that much about their relationship, but it's not like Hagrid wasn't friends with Sirius, and he's probably sad about Sirius's loss too. Not the same way that Harry is, but, he's not
he
just...
did know him longer than Harry did.
Well, exactly, and he died in battle, and that's the way he'd have wanted to go. But, no, I just think that, like, it's one of those things where, yes, Hagrid is comforting Harry, but he's also dealing with a loss too, because I think he probably did, admire Sirius, and probably wishes he could have had more time with him since his, being cleared of the crimes.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Like, I think a lot of this is because of Harry's age and just the fact that he hasn't really dealt with this. I guess he's gone through Cedric's loss at this point, but, he was not nearly as close with him as he is with Sirius. So I think that, Harry just being 15 and not having really done this much before, he's very uncomfortable, and he really just doesn't want to talk about it. And I get that too. I've been in that situation too. So I do feel for both parties here, because I think it's just unfortunate the way it goes. And normally Hagrid is one who is pretty good at comforting Harry, I think. So this is a little bit of an anomaly.
Yes, it definitely does it's not... Hagrid does put his foot in his mouth a lot, but he doesn't often not... He usually is able to comfort Harry, so it's sad to see here that it doesn't work the way that it usually does. And so then Harry just goes on this walk by himself, and it does have this pretty poignant line. If he says, sitting here on the edge of the lake with the terrible weight of grief dragging at him, with the loss of Sirius so raw and fresh inside, he could not muster any great sense of fear. So this is him thinking about the prophecy and at the same time having the grief of Sirius. So he's kind of going to go through the next few days of feeling kind of just in this state of like isolation and grief.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of starting to decide whether he wants to talk about Sirius or not. Obviously, it says here that Hermione is interested in talking about it. That seems pretty in keeping with who Hermione is, that she would be like wanting to be discussing this with Harry. But Ron is like hushing her every time she tries to bring it up.
Right, and then it's the kind of in the middle we have Harry saying he's not sure whether he wants to talk about Sirius yet. So it definitely is very heartbreaking to see Harry kind of walking through life feeling like this, and he's at the same time, mourning the idea that he's about to go back to Privet Drive, which is one of the most isolating places he can possibly go.
Yeah, like great place for him to have to go right after he's just, lost Sirius.
Right, a great place to grieve. But so yeah, then the next couple interactions that we're going to have are going to be part of his last days at Hogwarts. The first thing that happens after this Hagrid scene, 3 days later, he's sort of packing up and he finds the package that Sirius had given to him out after Christmas break. And Sirius had told him, use it if you need me. So he opens it up and it's this mirror with the note from Sirius explaining the two-way mirror. And this scene always really breaks my heart because I remember reading it the first time feeling like I think I did think it was going to work. Do you remember if you thought that this was going to work right away?
I don't know. And it's really heartbreaking to see Harry get this like flicker of hope that maybe the mirror he'll be able to talk to Sirius. He just feels so like confident in the mirror. And then just to be let down again. He's also just like really disappointed. This is what's going to lead him to go talk to Nick. But I think that the mirror is just so heartbreaking because not only, does it not work when he thinks it's going to work, but it's like he never got a chance to use it. He could have used it and it would have been perfect. That's what's so tragic about it. This would have been a fail-proof way of actually getting a hold of Sirius. Like, it's just, if only he would have opened it sooner.
Right. And then him breaking it here, just like that just breaks my heart too.
Right. I mean, it's not like he had a use for it now. I guess he could have found Sirius's full mirror and then used it with like Ron or Hermione or something. But like I don't know. It's just a symbolic moment that it feels really heartbreaking to see the mirror breaking.
Yeah, it always bothered me thinking about how Harry's so stubborn about, whatever this thing is, I'm not even going to try to use it because I don't want to lure Sirius out of his place of refuge. Like, that's why he doesn't ever open it until now. And again, like you said, it would have worked. It would have been the perfect way to communicate with Sirius. Umbridge would not have caught him. And Harry wasn't worried that Umbridge would have caught him, but he thought that it would have lured Sirius out. But we've kind of established we don't think that Sirius would have been lured out by pretty much anything other than Harry going to the Ministry. So it just there's so many things about the mirror that have always really tugged at my heartstrings, and it also really it hurts to see Harry have that confidence, like you said. And the thing he remembers right away is he says he remembered seeing his dead parents in the mirror of Erised 4 years ago, and he kind of forgets in that moment, I think, that the parents he saw in the mirror of Erised, that wasn't real, and that wasn't, he didn't communicate with them. He didn't have a relationship with them. That was just a vision, of like a picture pretty much. And he kind of forgot Dumbledore's warning about the mirror of Erised, all just wrapped up in the moment here of the hope of seeing Sirius again. And so this, like you said, leads into the Nick conversation, which is also heartbreaking.
Yeah, because then Harry, he's gotten his hopes up about the mirror. Then he gets let down, and then this idea occurs to him of like, but what if he could come back as a ghost? So he feels like the need to go track down Nearly Headless Nick, and then he's going to get let down again. So it's just like, I mean, we talked a little bit about like the stages of grief that he's going through here, but he kind of is doing it in a miniature version a few times here too, because, he's kind of in denial or like bargaining in this stage, I guess.
Yes, definitely like, bargaining here.
Yeah, like kind of just like trying to come up with a way that he could get Sirius back twice in a row, just like in a very brief span of time.
Right. So, and it's interesting in this conversation with Nick, and I know we talked about it in the Nick character study, but we see Nick has been expecting this conversation. It's weird. It's very strange to think how many conversations Nick and the other Hogwarts ghosts may or may not have had with different Hogwarts students over the years. Of any time a Hogwarts student faces a loss, do the ghosts kind of brace themselves of, okay, I'm going to have to tell them that their friend is not coming back or their relative is not coming back as a ghost. Again, feeling like, oh, where is the grief counselor or this just, any kind of mental health support for students at Hogwarts. But yeah, because it says a peculiar expression stole over how this is Nick's face. And he tries to put off the conversation, and Harry says it has to be now. And yeah, then he says it happens sometimes when somebody has suffered a loss.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, I think that the ghosts seem to have had this conversation many times throughout the years, and that they kind of they're a little bit in the role of the Hogwarts counselors, although not quite as like trained as a counselor would be.
Not at all.
But I do also think it's interesting that Nick is like tapped into the goings on enough that he's aware of Sirius dying, and that Harry was apparently close to Sirius. Like, how did he know that?
Yeah, that's what's kind of interesting. And I do wonder if there's some sort of like in the wizarding world or in the author's conception of the afterlife of like, did Nick see Sirius when he died or something, or did when Sirius made the choice to go on or stay as a ghost, was Nick privy to that somehow? Or I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I've always that's been one kind of theory I've had. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't know, because it just seems kind of weird. Like, then are the ghosts just like constantly interacting with people who are dying? Or
well, I think wizards and witches who are dying.
Yeah, I guess.
Which
maybe.
There aren't that many in England.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, maybe like if you knew that person, then you'll see them.
Some sort of. Well, yeah, and I mean, Nick would have known Sirius because he was a student at Hogwarts.
I don't totally buy it. I think it was more. My theory was going to be more of like Nick somehow found out from.
He's a gossip.
Yeah, he is. Or just like, he was hanging around Dumbledore's office, or one of the other ghosts told him, or the paintings told him or something. But
yeah, Phineas Nigellus was probably gossiping, or yeah, that's probably, hello, Sir Nicholas. They probably, did you hear Harry Potter's godfather's been killed?
Oh.
Yeah,
I wish we had a scene of that in the movie.
Hello, Sir Nicholas.
That's what would have happened if Chris Columbus had directed the 5th movie. Hello, Sir Nicholas.
What did you hear? Anyway, so yeah, Nick it's interesting to see he's described as mournful, miserable, and like Harry's getting exasperated and kind of just urging in this conversation, but Nick just kind of he's really hates this conversation, and I can see why.
Yeah, and I think that like he knows where it's going, so that's why it makes it even tougher for him. Just like he knows how disappointed Harry's going to be. He's seen this play out many times over the years. And then also I just think like in some ways Nick seems to somewhat regret his own decision.
Definitely.
So it's like, okay, to have to like rehash this with every grieving student is pretty tough.
Right. Yeah. It's really revealing when Nick says, I was afraid of death. I chose to remain behind. I sometimes wonder whether I oughtn't to have. Well, that is neither here nor there. In fact, I am neither here nor there. I should have done that all in his voice. But yeah, it does seem like he has some shame of the choice that he made, and he seems to regret having stayed as a ghost. And it's interesting how Harry seems so certain again, like with the confidence with the mirror. He says it doesn't matter. Sirius won't care if it's unusual. He'll come back. I know he will. And that's just it's very heartbreaking again.
Yeah, and just like how it then turns to, it's like Harry says, and so strong was his belief that Harry actually turned his head to check the door for a split second that he was going to see Sirius, pearly white and transparent but beaming, walking through it towards him.
Yeah, I hate that. It's so sad. Yeah, and then Nick just leaves, and it says Harry felt as though he had almost lost his godfather all over again, in losing the hope that he might be able to see or speak to him once more. So that's what's going to be really interesting in this episode, because we're going to get to the forest again, where Harry does, in a way, in a sense, speak to Sirius again. It's the imprint of his body or whatever the resurrection stone does, but it's interesting kind of to see that he has to come to that final stage of grief, of acceptance, before he can actually have the hope again of seeing him or actually have that actualized.
Yeah, he definitely goes through a lot. And I think it is very, obviously I love the forest again scene, and so I'm excited to talk about that. But I just think that this just shows just how important Sirius was to Harry, and how much he just would give anything for one last conversation. And I think, that's such a powerful moment.
Yeah, and so then this leads into the final conversation of this book that Harry has that's meaningful about Sirius, is with Luna here, and where he's coming back to the feast, and where he's leaving, and everybody else is at the feast, and he sees Luna, who's looking for her lost possessions, and then Luna turns to him and says, that man the Death Eaters killed was your godfather, wasn't he? Ginny told me. And it's very powerful here, because it says Harry found that for some reason he did not mind Luna talking about Sirius, unlike everybody else.
The thing is, I would put it down to the way Luna's saying it. She's being very direct. She's just kind of matter of fact about it. But the thing is, Hagrid was too. And I guess maybe Hagrid was trying to kind of smooth over the situation by saying oh, that's what Sirius would have wanted. I don't think that Harry wants to hear that. So I guess that was the one way that Hagrid was kind of trying to make things better, whereas Luna's just being more, observing and just stating things.
Yeah, and that's her style, is that she brings it up because Harry said he didn't feel like going to the feast, and she says, yeah, I don't suppose you do. So I think there's a couple reasons too why besides that he feels comfortable talking about it with Luna. And I think the first one, kind of interestingly, is that he's in the midst of feeling pity for her before she does that, brings that up, because he's feeling sorry for her, because she's observing that people have stolen her stuff, and that they call her Looney Lovegood and that kind of thing, and says that the feeling of pity is the first emotion that he's experienced besides the grief and anger that he's been filled with since Sirius's death. So I think Luna is just kind of a new presence, or her presence sort of evokes a new emotion for him, and so then that makes this conversation a little bit more digestible for Harry, because he's kind of feeling like it's kind of a new presence.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she's a little bit of a distraction to him,
yeah,
in a good way, just where he's focusing on something else for a minute, so that kind of brings him into a different headspace. But then, yeah, like I said, she just kind of is giving these observations, and then Harry remembers that she's able to see the Thestrals too. So then that's when he sort of asks her, what's that all about? I mean, not in so many words, but he says, has anyone you've ever known that you've known ever died? And she's pretty just, frank with him, and just explains that she lost her mother when she was doing a spell experiment and it went wrong. So, and then Luna brings up the idea that she believes she's going to see her mother again one day. And then Harry is very intrigued with that as well. So I think that's another aspect of this conversation, that it does give him that hope again of okay, well, maybe I will see Sirius again.
Well, of course, she brings this up because of what she heard behind the veil. And of course, we love the veil, so that's very important.
Well, any real weird sister fully endorses the veil as a concept in the books.
Well, of course, the veil is great. We love it.
Yeah. She brings up the veil and she says like that she also heard the voices behind the veil in the archway. And so Harry, I do think that gives him hope because he also heard that and he feels like, okay, maybe she's right.
Yes. So I think that does give him that smidge of hope that he was starting to lose after the mirror and after the Nick conversation. I think what's different about this is that it's not that like certain hope that because he was so assured in his hope that lasted for 5 minutes for each of those conversations or those two interactions with the mirror and with Nick, and this one is a more like delayed gratification sort of thing of like, well, maybe one day, and that sort of gives him a little bit of hope to look to the future. And I think that's kind of how a lot of people deal with grief is, no, we're not going to see that person or maybe, we're not going to have the idea of like, yes, I can call him on the phone, but who knows what the future holds. And we can't assuredly say it's never going to happen. And that kind of does bring peace to certain people. It depends on who you are, but I think that does bring peace to some people who are grieving, and I think Harry's kind of finding it that in this way.
Yes, and I also think that this is definitely like what helps Harry to get into that acceptance state. Like I think that this is the conversation that pushes him towards I do think he's grieving for Sirius throughout the next two books, but he honestly deals with the loss of Sirius in a more healthy way than he did with Cedric. Like, I feel like, we don't see him lashing out in anger anymore. We don't see him having these nightmares that he's waking up from constantly. So he does seem to come to an acceptance of it I don't know, more quickly, but just this conversation with Luna does seem to really help him.
Yeah, it really does. And I think in our next big conversation we have, well, before we have the in Half-Blood Prince, we have the will first, but when Dumbledore talks to Harry about Sirius, he says, like, I'm very impressed with the way you seem to be coping. And I think that this conversation with Luna has a big impact on how Harry's able to really does grieve pretty well and healthily, and especially considering that he goes back to Perfect Drive after dealing with the loss. He's not gonna be as wrought with emotions as he is for a long period of time as he is with Cedric's death.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that brings us into Half-Blood Prince, which starts us off. The first couple chapters, we have a couple short mentions of him just in the other minister scene, and in the
Sirius
Spinner's End. Yeah, Sirius Black. So I never really know, like, what are we supposed to pronounce it, Sirius or something? Like,
no, I think it's just that he heard the name Sirius, and so he pictured it spelled out. Like the word Sirius. How
does Fudge know that he's saying it wrong when he says it? Because he's like, Sirius Black? Oh, you mean Sirius Black?
Oh, I don't know. I guess
I don't know either.
I always just the moment that I remember is when he's like thinking to himself, or like when he's rehashing it in his mind and is like somebody named Sirius Black. So maybe, but I know what you're talking about with Fudge too. So maybe he does say it a little different. I don't know.
Well, he must, because he says to Fudge, like, will Sirius Black be returning to Voldemort or whatever? And Fudge is like, who? Oh, you mean Sirius Black? Like, what?
Well, I always okay, not to get too into the weeds about this, but
this is not a proper eulogy for Sirius, Alice.
Fudge says black distractedly. Then he says Sirius Black, you mean? So I always just picture that Fudge kind of like zoned out for a minute. And then is just like, Sirius Black? No.
Okay, I guess that could be it. But the spelling thing has been kind of like, is there supposed to be a difference for pronunciation? Anyway, let's move on to talking about Sirius's will, because this is our first like big scene. Unless you want to talk about the Snape and Narcissa and Bellatrix kind of trashing Sirius at Spinner's End.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
when Snape is like, oh, you finished the job, Bella. Thank you.
Hate that.
Pretty gross. Me too. Anyway, so let's move on to Sirius's will. And this is going to be, there's a couple moments with Harry that before he has this conversation with Dumbledore, where people kind of throw out the name Sirius or talk about Sirius in a throwaway manner that kind of pangs Harry. So here we see Dumbledore wants to talk about the will, and Vernon, his godfather's dead. He's dead. His godfather.
Yeah, and I think Yeah, very very sensitive way of mentioning that, Vernon. It's good to see that Uncle Vernon remembers that Harry's a person with feelings. But it's just the nature of Harry and Sirius's relationship really leads to a lot of like weird moments with Harry because there's just a lot of people didn't know about their connection and the fact that he was Harry's godfather, and so Harry will just like hear the name Sirius like dropped at random times, and you know, people have no idea the personal connection to Harry.
Yes, exactly. So that's what's going to be kind of especially hurtful to Harry, or to kind of just, again, it's not intentional, but yeah, like the Slughorn moment a little bit later, that's going to be an instance of just the name Sirius being thrown around without knowing who they're, you know, what the actual relationship between Harry and Sirius was.
Exactly.
Yeah, so just to kind of go through Sirius's will a little bit, this isn't like a ton on Sirius here, but he left Harry Grimmauld Place and Creature. And what's interesting is that when Harry hears about Grimmauld Place, it says he never wanted to set foot in number 12 Grimmauld Place again if he could help it. He thought he would be haunted forever by the memory of Sirius prowling in its dark, musty rooms alone, imprisoned within the place he had wanted so desperately to leave. So that image definitely, I can see why Harry's so bothered by that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that they do return to Grimmauld Place next book, and Harry doesn't seem like he's not like resistant to going there at that point.
No.
So I do think that this is a matter of like it hasn't been very long since Sirius died. I think putting a little bit of space between that memory and returning it makes it easier. Like I think that gets a little bit less painful for Harry. I'm sure it's still hard, but I think, you know, he's more ready to do it a year later.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think also it's sort of exposure therapy in a way, because when he gets to Grimmauld Place, I think he finds a lot of comfort in being there, surprisingly to himself, you know, and I think the space, the year's time probably helps as well, like you said. But I think also he's probably not expecting that it actually helps him heal when he gets to Grimmauld Place. And we'll talk about that in the Deathly Hallows a little bit book, and when we get to the Deathly Hallows book a little bit. But yeah, I think that here he's thinking, no, I'll never go back. But then actually when he does go back, it ends up being sort of a place that brings him some comfort. He sleeps in Sirius's bedroom. He sees old photos, and, you know, that actually helps him a little bit, I think, a year later.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of forgot about some of those details. I think you're right, though, that he definitely ends up, you know, kind of I don't know, it gets a little bit therapeutic, like you said.
Yeah, so we go through the figuring out whether Sirius was able to successfully leave Harry the house and Creature, and whether the black family magic was too hard to break. But we don't have a ton here to talk about really with Sirius until it moves on to the Creature moment. Yeah, I mean, actually, honestly, Creature, there's not much to discuss here that relates to Sirius.
Yeah, the only thing is that we already kind of brought up is the fact that then Harry sends him off to live at Hogwarts and work at Hogwarts, and it's like, well, why didn't we do that sooner?
Right, exactly. But yeah, so then we have Slughorn, like I said, kind of just mentions Sirius's name, so that kind of brings another pang the way it does with Vernon. And then finally, the one of the biggest conversations that's important to talk about in this book is when Dumbledore, before they go into the Burrow that night, talks to Harry about how he's dealing well with the loss, and that Harry actually starts crying in front of Dumbledore too, which makes this conversation pretty emotional.
Yeah, I mean, Harry actually opens up to Dumbledore a lot. Like you said, he cries, like his eyes fill with tears, and he just says, like, it's hard to realize that he won't write to me again. And so it's like, I don't know, it's interesting to see that Harry's willing to talk about it, because he wasn't really at that point in the last book. So he's kind of moved to that stage as well. And then Dumbledore doesn't, like, say a ton here. He's just like, you know, kind of sums up. He kind of briefly eulogizes Sirius. He's like, Sirius represented much to you that you had never known before. Naturally, the loss is devastating. So he's just kind of like saying some snippets of wisdom. And then Harry's like, you know, saying that basically he's resolved to kind of, you know, put this in the past and go out and fight as a way of like honoring his legacy.
Right. Yeah. And at this moment, too, where he says that, it was cruel that you and Sirius had such a short time together, a brutal ending to what should have been a long and happy relationship. This is kind of his proper eulogy, finally. But yeah, it does feel this does give Harry some peace here, too, I think. Even though Dumbledore, the last interaction he'd had with Dumbledore before this was him throwing stuff at him, and there's kind of that awkwardness between them, and they're in the broom cupboard with all these spiders and stuff. But it says that Harry realizes that Dumbledore understands that he's spent all his time at the Dursleys lying on his bed, refusing meals, staring at the misted window, full of the chill emptiness that he'd come to associate with Dementors. So we said in the last week's episode that we don't really see the depression that Harry goes through so much in terms of the stages of grief, but it sounds like he definitely did that in his time at the Dursleys.
Yeah. And I do think that this conversation with Dumbledore, like you said, it's therapeutic in a way just to hear Dumbledore sort of validating Harry's feelings. And then also just when Harry says that he's determined to fight and that he wants to, do that to honor Sirius and his parents. And Dumbledore backs him up on that. And he's like, spoken like your mother and father's son and Sirius's true godson. I just think that kind of validation really helps Harry to feel good with that kind of as his next step.
Yeah, I think so too. And it definitely kind of leads into the private lessons, like the kind of tone that they'll have, Dumbledore and Harry in their relationship in this book. But yeah, that kind of brings us into our next kind of theme in this book, which is the Tonks theory that everybody seems to have. And it's really interesting with Tonks because she's going through this. She's clearly depressed in the sixth book. And everybody, Mrs. Weasley, Hermione, Ron and Harry, because of Hermione, I think, but everybody seems to be attributing Tonks's depression to Sirius's loss. And I guess Molly does become privy to understanding that Tonks loves Lupin, but it's interesting because they seem like Hermione has kind of created this fiction of she blames herself for Sirius's death, and it's very interesting because I don't think that any of this is true, right? Tonks is really just lovesick, right?
Yes, I think so. I think it is weird, and I do think that Hermione definitely, I just, the more that we're dissecting this plot with Sirius, the more I realize that Hermione really didn't understand Sirius at all.
No, I don't think she did at all.
I mean, kind of on a surface level, she did. But then she did a lot of projecting. There's a lot of her interpreting how she maybe would have felt in that situation, or kind of how she would expect somebody to feel in that situation, and then just putting that on Sirius. And this is an instance where I think then she's, going to what she knows of the idea that, Harry, everybody there kind of feels guilty for Sirius dying. So she's just going to assume that Tonks also feels that way. And we've got a whole narrative that Hermione spins out for us.
Yes. Well, and then the problem then is that Harry and Ron take everything Hermione says super seriously. Right. I mean, sometimes they will sort of contradict her, but and here they sort of do, but they then start to take it to heart of, well, Hermione has to be right because she is right about a lot of emotional reads, but a lot of her reads on serious related situations are very wrong. So she explains, quote unquote explains, she thinks it was her fault he died. She was fighting Bellatrix Lestrange, wasn't she? I think she feels that if only she had finished her off, Bellatrix couldn't have killed Sirius. It's survivor's guilt. I know Lupin's tried to talk her around, but she's still really down.
Right. And it's okay, I can see how you could get to that point, but it's a huge reach. That would be something where if Tonks felt guilty because she didn't finish off Bellatrix earlier, it's that was not that was not related. I mean, yeah, if she would have killed Bellatrix, then I guess Sirius would be alive. But no reason for her to feel guilty. Like, she tried her best. It's not like she purposely didn't kill Bellatrix or something.
Right. So it's definitely interesting, and we'll track it a little bit more the more we see Tonks in this book. But
honestly, like, this has sort of changed my, like, I feel like Hermione's whole narrative on Tonks sort of impacted the way I viewed Tonks for a while, too.
Me too.
Like, okay, well, I mean, I guess I get it, but it's also like a little bit of a weird reaction. So I've always just kind of I feel like that's why I sometimes am a little bit like second guessing Tonks.
Right. Yeah, that it's not actually what's going on with her this book. That's what's really interesting. So when we see Tonks next, Harry's going to. This is when after Malfoy stamps on his face and then Tonks rescues him. Harry like has a moment where he reflected uncomfortably that Hermione would have suggested he say something consoling about Sirius to her, that it hadn't been her fault at all, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was far from blaming her for Sirius's death. It was no more her fault than anyone else's, and much less than his. But he did not like talking about Sirius if he could avoid it. So I'm very glad for Harry and Tonks' sake that he didn't go, oh, just so you know, Tonks, I don't blame you at all for Sirius's death. She would have been like, well, yeah, why would you blame me?
Yeah, I think at that point she might have the reverse effect and make her start thinking, well, should I feel guilty for this?
Right, exactly. Well, if he's saying, oh, I don't blame you, then I didn't think I should be blamed, but maybe now I should.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then this leads into Harry, the real person that Harry blames for Sirius's loss. This is when Snape is the one who brings him back to the castle, and Harry is hating Snape on this walk, of course, as usual. And this sort of serves as the narrator reminding us who Snape is, but it says that Snape had placed himself forever and irrevocably beyond the possibility of Harry's forgiveness by his attitude towards Sirius. Whatever Dumbledore said, Harry had had time to think over the summer and had concluded that Snape's snide remarks to Sirius about remaining safely hidden while the rest of the Order of the Phoenix were off fighting Voldemort had probably been a powerful factor in Sirius rushing off to the Ministry the night that he had died. And then it's interesting because I think both of us, like we've been talking about these Sirius character studies, we have sort of believed that, and we've sort of come around on not really believing that so much. But it's interesting because it does say here that the reason Harry's clinging to this notion is partially because it lets him have somebody to blame, which is Snape, and then also because he knows Snape isn't grieving Sirius the way that anybody else is. So that explanation is there of why Harry's saying that, and it's not supposed to necessarily have the reader say, oh yeah, well, Harry's right to blame Snape.
Right. I think that was honestly I'm sure this is probably true of you, although I don't want to pull a Hermione and just project this onto you. But I think that the reason I always bought this was because I absolutely could not stand Snape either. And so definitely. I was super angry with Snape, and just at the point where I also wanted to, detest Snape and blame him for everything. So, I mean, I still do blame Snape for a lot of things, but I do think that his comments to Sirius were not a powerful motivator for why Sirius went to the Ministry. I think that Sirius would not have left the Ministry for anything other than Harry being in Voldemort's clutches, or in a deathly battle with the Death Eaters.
It was his love for Harry that caused him to do it. It wasn't Snape taunting him at all. No. But yeah, I think what it serves the narrative purpose in this book of the reader is supposed to distrust Snape as much as possible leading up to Snape killing Dumbledore. So I think it's very clear to me now, like, that I don't blame Snape for this. And it's actually, you're sort of tricked as a reader, or at least we were, into blaming Snape and to thinking Snape is terrible because this book, you're supposed to think that, or you're supposed to be having this like seeds of distrust. So just interesting to see this conversation, or this internal monologue from Harry.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I think my whole perspective on this has totally shifted.
Yeah. So then the last couple scenes we have with Sirius related is we see Mundungus in Hogsmeade trying to sell Sirius's things, which prompts a really angry reaction from Harry. He's really, really mad about this. Just thrown into a whole fit of shouting at Mundungus, trying to curse him, and then just complaining, or not complaining, even just like ranting to Hermione and Ron and to Tonks. He's nicked Sirius's stuff, nicked it. And Tonks, yes, but still.
Shouldn't Tonks have been very upset about that too?
Well, she probably feels that she has no right to say anything since it's her fault he died.
I can totally see why. Like, I do think that this is some misplaced anger here. Like, I can see why he's mad at Mundungus, but I do think a lot of it is just that he's still so upset about Sirius, and so he's gonna lash out at Mundungus and sort of like take this moment as a chance to like get out some of his pent up emotions.
Yeah, well, I think also it just sort of is a slap in the face of it's not, he knows that those things didn't matter to Sirius in his life, but it's sort of the like seeing somebody who had a relationship with Sirius feeling okay with doing this, I think kind of feels like, well, why are you moving on so quickly? Like, shouldn't you still be grieving too? And I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what he's doing here, but I kind of feel like he's upset at just it's like the Vernon throwaway comment, the Slughorn throwaway comment of Sirius's name, of just like Sirius is gone, and this is just a reminder of that, and it's very, just there. It's not like it's really like thrown in Harry's face, just sort of something he observes, I guess, which makes it almost worse.
Yeah, and I do think that Harry sees himself, like we talked about already, what he said to Dumbledore about how he's going to go fight on behalf of Sirius. So I also do think that he sees himself as like Sirius's one defender now. So he's going to be super loyal to Sirius, and like that stuff was Sirius's, so it sort of represents something that Harry can stand up for on Sirius's behalf. So I think there's kind of a lot going on here, but I do think that Harry's reaction definitely comes from a place of just like this misplaced anger onto Mundungus, and he's not able to see the situation rationally to think, oh, well, Sirius didn't really care about those things anyway.
Right. Which he does come to afterwards. So pretty soon afterwards, he starts thinking about, Sirius never really Sirius hated those things, actually. And Sirius probably would have been glad to have Mundungus get rid of them for him. So that's kind of interesting.
I'm just picturing Sirius like, thanks, Mundungus, for getting rid of that stuff.
Honestly, that's probably what his reaction would have been, right?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I can still totally see why Harry's annoyed. Like, I would be really irritated if, like, I saw Mundungus just, like, being that, like, brazen about it. Like, that's pretty awful. But, and I like how, is it Ron who thinks that he's like, well, yeah, that is your stuff, so I can see why you're mad.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that has nothing, and Harry's like, oh, yeah, that is mine.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's more about the principle of the thing of just like, wow, Mundungus sure had a lot of nerve to do that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so then our final moment with Sirius in this book really is again Tonks. The theory of Tonks evolves even more into Harry starting to think that Tonks might have been a bit in love with Sirius.
It's so okay. I mean, I'm kind of glad we have a little bit of comic relief with this Sirius plot, because it's all been so, honestly, like, it's been his name. It's been so serious. Like,
well, yes, serious.
So it's kind of nice to have a lighthearted plot that's kind of like,
it's not actually lighthearted, but it's lighthearted when you think about it. Like, what are you thinking?
No, it's lighthearted once you know that it's not true. Like, this would have been pretty heartbreaking, I guess, if Tonks really was in love with Sirius.
Not to mention disturbing. They were first cousins. So. But yeah, because we see Tonks, she's like there to see Dumbledore, and it's the same day as the werewolf attack, so we find out later that that's why she's so emotional. But it's Harry's talking, no one from the Order writes to me anymore, not since Sirius. He saw that her eyes had filled with tears. Harry, I'm sorry, I mean, I miss him as well.
And then Tonks is just like, what? Like, no response to the I miss him as well.
So awkward. Like I don't know. It's very cringy to think about this moment of Harry trying to comfort Tonks, because he's been like steeling himself to do it ever since the last time he interacted with Tonks, where he's like, I should say something. I should tell her I don't think it's her fault. I'm glad he glad he didn't say, I don't think it's your fault this time.
When he said, I mean, I miss him as well, and then talks, what? She said blankly. And then my favorite is when Harry goes to tell Hermione and Ron about this theory, and Harry's like, he's like, you don't think she can have been, in love with Sirius? And then Hermione, what on earth makes you say that?
I don't know, but she was nearly crying when I mentioned his name, and her Patronus is a big four-legged thing now. I wondered whether it hadn't become, him. Hermione, it's a thought.
So funny. I mean, honestly, like I said, it's nice to have a little bit of levity brought to these scenes.
Yes, it definitely is. This is pretty much the end of the Sirius arc in Half-Blood Prince. We have another moment at Dumbledore's funeral where Harry thinks this is the first funeral he's been to because there was not a body for Sirius, because the veil took him, of course.
Yes, the veil was what killed him, right?
Well, of course, yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, and it is interesting that Harry has experienced all this death and he's never been to a funeral yet.
Yeah, that is notable. So it is interesting. I mean, and again, he has experienced a lot of loss, but Cedric and Sirius are really the two that he's that he would have gone to funerals for, possibly. And Cedric was kind of different because, yeah, a lot of things were different about that.
And the other thing is, it's interesting that he says, there'd been no funeral for Sirius because there hadn't been a body. And it's okay, I guess in a traditional sense, that was really important that everybody view the body. But, I think by the 90s, when this is taking place, that kind of was not a requirement at all. You don't have to have a body at a funeral.
Right, exactly. That's kind of a weird thing to say.
That honestly could just be Harry's interpretation of why there wasn't a funeral. Right. I think it's much more likely that there wasn't a funeral just because Sirius was still, supposedly a convicted murderer. I mean, I know that they kind of cleared him after the fact, but Sirius's life did not really lend itself towards a funeral, even though there were people that would miss him.
Yeah, it would have been a different thing because, the Ministry would have had a different idea of him. Yeah, I agree. I think also, I mean, maybe in the Wizarding world, funerals have a different purpose than they do for Muggles. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah. But that is pretty much the end of our discussion of Sirius in Half-Blood Prince. We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors and come back to discuss his impact in Deathly Hallows. So today's episode of the podcast is brought to us by Bombas. Bombas makes the most comfortable socks in the history of feet. They've literally rethought every little detail of the socks we wear to make them way more comfortable.
Yes, I wear my Bombas socks every day that I possibly can. They're the best socks ever. And not only are they super comfortable, but they're also really cute. I've got some really nice bright patterns on my socks, and they come in all different styles for different weather activities and shoe styles.
And these socks do more than keep feet cozy. They also help to give back to the most vulnerable members of our community. Because for every pair of socks that you purchase, Bombas donates a pair to someone in need. The generosity of Bombas customers has allowed them to donate over 40 million pairs of socks and counting through their nationwide network of 3,000 plus giving partners.
And the impact is more powerful than ever. To those experiencing homelessness, these socks represent the dignity of putting on clean clothes, a small comfort that's especially important right now.
So give a pair when you buy a pair and get 20% off your first purchase at bombas.com/realweird.
That's BOMBAS.com/realweird for 20% off your first purchase. Bombas.com/realweird.
And that brings us right back into our episode. We're going to finish our discussion of Sirius, our proper eulogy of Sirius, by discussing his impact on the Deathly Hallows book. So in Deathly Hallows, we kind of already touched on this a little bit, but a lot of the stuff with Sirius before we get to the Forest Again moments is going to be the time that the trio spends at Grimmauld Place. And it actually, like I said, sort of brings Harry a lot of peace in this time when he comes to Sirius's house. And, he's been going through some pretty crazy stuff, the experiences before they get to Grimmauld Place on the run. And, I mean, he's not actively grieving Sirius in this book the way he is in the sixth book, but he ends up going into Sirius's bedroom one morning And then he finds a lot of stuff in this room, and then he actually ends up sleeping there every night for the rest of the time that they're there. So kind of interesting to see the impact that Sirius's bedroom has on him.
Yes, and I do love that we get to finally see Sirius's bedroom from when he was a teenager. Like, I find it kind of entertaining. It does seem pretty typical for what you would expect of Sirius's room. Like, it says that there's some large Gryffindor banners, and then there's also pictures of Muggle motorcycles. Cool. And also some posters of bikini-clad Muggle girls.
He can tell that they're Muggles because they're not moving like they are in photos. So that's a little bit like, okay, Sirius. Kind of interesting. But yeah, I do like the explanation that it says Harry could only assume that Sirius's parents had been unable to remove the permanent sticking charm that kept them on the wall because he was sure that they would not have appreciated that. So I do like that there's the explanation of why the room is still looking the same way it did when he was a teenager, because if he lived in a loving household, even then, like, it's pretty crazy to have the room look the same way it did when you were a teenager. So I'm glad my bedroom doesn't look exactly the same as it did when I was living there as a teen. The decor is quite similar still.
Yeah, but it's not quite to the same level that it used to be.
Right, but you still do have the Office poster and the Friends posters and some random, Deathly Hallows poster, that kind of thing.
Yes, that's true. But I think it's a little classier looking than when I was, an early teen.
Just kind of funny that our parents didn't take down the posters because now it's a guest room. But anyway, so yeah, the description of the decorations in Sirius's room is definitely entertaining. Then Harry finds, first of all, a photo of the Marauders, which does include Wormtail, looking extremely dorky. But yeah, Harry tries to take it from the wall, but again, the permanent sticking charm is preventing Harry from being able to take it. And then he finds this letter from Lily, which, doesn't totally relate to Sirius so much, but it does obviously have a big impact on Harry.
Well, right. It doesn't relate to Sirius because it's addressed to Dear Padfoot. So I guess this is before Snuffles really caught on. It's kind of stupid because then, like, she lists out James's name constantly. It's not like
I don't think she wrote that as a code. I think she wrote it as, like, that's the nickname that they use for each other.
Oh, I guess so. I guess Padfoot was just never as catchy as I think they thought it was.
Well, that's probably the same thing that most of our friends would say about our nicknames for each other and our nicknames for friends. Nicknames are rarely as catchy to outsiders as they are to the people using them.
Wow, sounded like a Dumbledore quote.
Yeah, it was super inspirational. Nicknames are rarely, or what did I even say? Nicknames rarely make sense. Yeah. Nicknames are rarely as catchy to those outside the relationship. Somebody else can write it down and tell me what I said because it was so wise.
Then I want to see it like formatted into some beautiful wall art.
Right. Well, that's a trend on TikTok of lately where it's to the 1,000 Miles song. Hopefully some people know this, where it's like random things people said, like formatted as inspirational posters. So that could be a nice Real Weird Sisters TikTok. I'm sure somebody's going to make that.
Definitely. It's going to blow up.
It's going to go viral. It's going to sweep the nation. Okay, and anyway, one thing that's interesting in this letter here is the revelation that this does. Harry notices too that Sirius had bought him his first broomstick, which first broomstick is a bit of a stretch because it's like a toy broomstick, but still sweet.
It is sweet. We've talked about this letter before. I think you're right. Like, it doesn't actually tie into Sirius that much, so we don't need to dwell on it. But that's a nice revelation. It's also a little corny, but I think it's supposed to be, I guess.
Right. So yeah, those are the two big things that he sees in the bedroom that have a big impact on him. But like I said, what's interesting and something I'd kind of forgotten is that throughout the rest of their time at Grimmauld Place, it says Harry was sleeping in Sirius's room. So kind of touching to think that.
It is, yeah. It's nice that he gets that opportunity to kind of just like go back to Sirius's roots, I guess.
Right. So then, yeah, we have Creature coming to Grimmauld Place and getting the Regulus story and all of that. That's not really relating to eulogizing Sirius here, but one thing that's interesting is after the Creature story that he or the Creature's tale, chapter title up, as a matter of fact. But after Creature tells his tale, Harry says, like, I don't understand you, and Hermione does this explanation, and this is where she does have an accurate read on Sirius of her saying that Sirius was horrible to Creature, and it's no good looking like that. You know it's true. Creature had been alone for a long time when Sirius came to live here, and he was probably starving for a bit of affection. And she explains that, wizards will pay for how they treat house elves, and Sirius is an example of that.
Yeah, and I think that this is not as much Hermione having a great read on Sirius as it is having a good read on Creature and house elves. I think that
True.
She certainly has a gift for empathizing with the house elves, and I think that she does that pretty naturally, but she does not empathize as well with Sirius.
No.
Not that I think in this particular plot, I don't think he deserves a lot of empathy, but I'm just saying, like, I think she's doing a good job of understanding the motivations for Creature and why he acted how he did. But I don't think that necessarily applies to Sirius.
Right. Well, and then what's interesting, and the reason I wanted to talk about it here, is that Harry responds to this. Actually, he is willing to listen to Hermione talk about how Sirius was horrible to Creature for the first time, really, because when Dumbledore tells him that at the end of the 5th book, even when he thinks about Creature in the 6th book, he's not really willing to acknowledge that Sirius was flawed in that regard. But in this moment, he thinks about what Hermione says. He thinks about what Dumbledore had said about Sirius, that I do not think Sirius ever saw Creature as a being with feelings as acute as humans. And then we see this 180 switch for Harry. All of a sudden, he is talking to Creature with respect. He's asking Creature things for things in this way that Creature responds to super positively. So Harry reflects on Sirius in a way that he hasn't before, and so this is an important moment in as far as Harry's relationship with Sirius goes.
Yeah, it definitely is. Like, I think he's gotten some distance from the situation to where now he can actually look at it and see Sirius's flaws. I think before it was a situation where he especially didn't want to hear other people pointing out flaws about Sirius. And like I said, with the Mundungus situation, he kind of viewed himself as like Sirius's defender. Yes. So I think now he's able to kind of take a little less biased viewpoint and see the ways that Sirius was a flawed person. So I think you're right. That's pretty significant here.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, then we're going to move on, and the next, the last two moments in Deathly Hallows really with Sirius are going to be the Snape memory. So in The Prince's Tale, we see Sirius as an 11-year-old kid on the train. And I think this is a little corny, but it's obviously there to sort of, the Marauders, and like just a little moment for, the super fans to see Sirius as a kid. It's pretty exciting. But we do see that Sirius is already dreading the idea of how he might have to be in Slytherin because his whole family has been in Slytherin, and James is like, oh, I thought you seemed all right, blimey.
I do think it's telling that Sirius came into Hogwarts with the idea of, I don't want to be like my family. Like, he was already, it's almost like a nature nurture thing. Like, it seems like he was almost born different from his family.
Yes.
And so that's interesting because it's a different story than kind of what we get in The Cursed Child, where, that seems like a different perspective on, like, a kid who ends up in a house different from their family. So it wasn't something that it seemed like it took Sirius any time to come to terms with. He seemed like that was his goal, was to get into Gryffindor.
Right. That is interesting to see that here. It's also interesting when, Black being ahead of Evans in the alphabet and ahead of Potter, Sirius has been sorted first, and he's sitting on the Gryffindor bench. So then when Lily is sorted, which is part of Snape's memory, Harry sees Sirius move up the bench to make room for her. Lily took one look at him, seemed to recognize him from the train, folded her arms, and firmly turned her back on him. So,
I don't know. Yeah, let's not get too into that.
You don't like that?
Well, we all know. Yeah, I don't know. Lily comes out like I love Lily and I really respect her, and this is not about her, but sometimes she comes across a little too perfect. But I do think that has to do with the narrator of who's telling this memory.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
But so then we finally move into kind of what we said we were going to talk about right away, and part of why we wanted to do this episode is so we can talk about the forest again scene. And this is one of your favorite scenes in the whole series, and it's one that I like, but it doesn't move me the way it moves many, I think.
Yeah, you're weird about that. And I remember I got kind of mad at you when we talked about this because you don't seem to get it.
Listeners got mad at me too.
Yeah, well, it was a weird reaction that you have to this. So
yeah, well, I like parts of it. What I like is when Harry goes into death and when he has them with him. But I don't really like the conversation. The conversation. Well, people are gonna get mad at me again. It just is kind of corny again.
Well, it is a little corny. You mean like what Sirius says about how dying doesn't hurt?
Actually, what Sirius says, I kind of like that. It's just the like, you've been so brave, like you're nearly there. Like I don't love. I don't know.
That's a good part. Okay. But so anyway, yeah, Sirius's contribution to this, which we're not going to pick apart the whole scene. We can just talk about Sirius. Is that he says that it doesn't hurt to die. It's quicker and easier than falling asleep. And maybe that's because he died via the veil.
Well, the veil makes it a lot easier, true.
And then his other contribution is he says we are a part of you, invisible to anyone else. So I do like that line a lot. Yeah,
because that's how they already are. They are part of him, and that line that is moving to see that expressed here. I don't think they needed to come out of the Resurrection Stone to be part of him, invisible to anyone else.
Right. I think the Resurrection Stone just helps make manifest what is actually always true.
Yeah.
And so I think that some of this, we don't need to get, I guess, too much into the weeds of talking about what these shadows are, but I do feel like it's sort of like a way of illuminating something that's already inside of Harry.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that Sirius vocalizes it here of saying, we are part of you, invisible to anyone else. So yeah. And we talked about how this sort of is the culmination of Harry's hope of seeing Sirius again that he thought he lost, and sort of the Luna's conversation come to fruition finally of he is seeing Sirius again in a way. And yeah, it is interesting to see that it does sort of come full circle.
Yeah, and I think that it's, out of all of these people, I mean, obviously Harry has dreamed of seeing his parents for many years, but I think, and then Lupin just died, so he hasn't even had the chance to really, think too much about that. So I think that seeing Sirius is the one where it's I just think that that's almost the most meaningful one to him. I think getting to see his parents and interact with them, you can't really, I guess that's not really comparable to anything else. But Sirius is the one here who he got to know and has been missing for the past 2 years. And so I think seeing him is very powerful.
Well, and I think Sirius almost is the most real of the four here. And this is where we get into us. I mean, we're not trying to get into the weeds of what the ghostly figures are here, but Sirius is the one, like you said, that Harry had the closest relationship with in his living life or living memory. And the way James acts here, the way Lily acts here, both of them, this is who he wants them to be, and who knows what really they are. Sirius is somebody he knew so deeply, and he's seeing real. This is Sirius. Lupin, again, similar, but Lupin doesn't do much here. He just basically apologizes to Lupin for dying, that Lupin has died.
Yeah, and again, Lupin, Harry hasn't had time to process Lupin's death yet, so it's kind of interesting that he gets to see him again so soon.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm glad that Harry gets this moment of closure with Sirius, and his obviously with the other three as well. But I think with Sirius in particular, like he really needed that closure of being able to see him.
Yeah,
and talk to
definitely.
him.
And it gives us the chance to properly eulogize him, because this does kind of feel like the culmination of it all. There is one last moment, though, that I want to talk about, which is very brief. But when Bellatrix dies, this is like our last mention of Sirius in the book. It says that she laughed the same exhilarated laugh her cousin Sirius had given as he toppled backward through the veil. So it's just interesting seeing that Harry sees that laugh the same way that he saw his godfather laugh before she killed him. So that
I think
kind of a
that,
brief moment, but I
think
talk
that
about
definitely has come full circle to just see like, okay, well, she's gotten her comeuppance. She's died in a brutal killing the way that Sirius did, but it's always kind of like weirded me out that she was laughing in the same way that he did, because I sort of liked that he was laughing when he died. Like, I felt like that sort of like eased the blow of it or something.
Yeah.
And then so to see her kind of like happy as she died was also not, I didn't really like that.
Yeah, well, I think it's the exhilaration of the battle that they're both laughing at it. And it's not necessarily like, amused, or maybe it is, but I think I associated, it's interesting that it says the same exhilarated laugh. And maybe it's just genetics. They have similar face bone structure, so that's why they laugh the same way. But like I always picture Sirius's laugh the same way that Fred's laugh is. But I think I'm wrong to do that in a way, because I think what Sirius was laughing at was like just the thrill of the battle, and it seems like that is something that he and Bellatrix shared. In a different, hers is more sinister, obviously, but I think that could be some sort of family trait of just feeling like the thrill of being in battle does seem to bring that emotion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is the thrill of battle that they're kind of laughing. That's the exhilarated adjective there, is definitely like that's what leads you to believe for sure. So I agree with that. I just always sort of, and I don't necessarily think Sirius was like happy as he died, but I do think that he had like an adrenaline rush, that he was enjoying being in battle. And so that always sort of was something that I was, I took some comfort in. So I do wish that Bellatrix would have had her face like contorted in pain or something.
Right. That would have been nice, I suppose.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have been as symbolic and full circle-y.
Right. True. But yeah, so that was our proper eulogy of Sirius. Alice, do you have anything else you want to say about this man?
I know I've already, said this a number of times, but I just definitely want to reiterate that this has been the character I think that has changed the most for me in my mind, as far as me understanding them and appreciating him.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. I mean, I think there have been other characters that I've come around more so on, or just as much so on, but really Sirius is one that I have developed a much deeper understanding of, and it's not just through the character studies, but through the book club as well, of really understanding him a lot more than I used to. And I used to have this influenced by Hermione, like we said, this idea of who he was that was kind of very flawed, more so than I see him now, and less so tragic. And now it's much more of a empathy and feeling like this was such a loss. It really is such a loss to lose Sirius when we do, and for the reader as well as for the characters. But yeah, I really agree with you that my opinion on him has changed a lot, and I'm really glad, because it's gotten a lot more complex, and I think he's a much deeper character than I used to think he was.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think I understand his relationship with Harry so much better now, and I think, like you said, just to see how his arc really was so tragic, and how, we have a lot of tragedies in these books. This is one that, like, all around his character was tragic, I think, more than any of the other ones. Everybody else had moments where they got to really thrive. We didn't really get to ever see that for Sirius.
Yeah, so we have the character ratings for each of the last three books, of book 3, book 4, and book 5. Do we want to do a final character rating for Sirius of all overall? Because I'm interested to see that we only ever gave him 4 stars, was the most we ever gave him for depth, and I kind of feel like that's not fair now. because I just made a big deal of how deep his character is.
Maybe we should give him a 5 for depth.
Yeah.
I think uniqueness and creativity. I mean, he's a pretty creative character too, as far as he's pretty unique.
I think we stay 5 for uniqueness and creativity. That's what we gave him in book 5. Increase the depth to 5 and then keep humor at 2 and heart at 4.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he loses a point on heart for the way he treats Creature, as we talked about.
Right.
And then humor, he's just not very funny. And I think he had a great time with James. He seemed to be funny when he was a high schooler, but he has not had any source of, like, ability to be funny later in life. I mean, he's just too tragic.
Doesn't have a lot of source material, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I think that gives him a total of 16 points. It's pretty high up there in terms of the character rankings. So I'm proud to see that we've really come around, Alice, on our boy.
We have, because I think if anybody goes back and listens to the first few book club, the early book club, I think we were kind of down on Sirius, and I feel really bad about that now.
We definitely were. So I'm glad to see that we've changed. So you can find those character ratings and rankings eventually on our website, realweirdSisters.com. That's also a great way to see all the shows that we've ever recorded. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/realweirdSisters. On Twitter @RealWeirdSister, Instagram @RealWeirdSistersPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we've been just wrapping up this past week our March Madness voting. So at this point when we're recording, we don't know who the winner is, but when this episode comes out, I think the winner will have emerged victorious. It's taken longer than I thought it would, but just a few matchups left at this point when we're recording. Of course, the number one way that you can support the show is by going to patreon.com/realweirdSisters and supporting us at a financial level there. With that, you also get access to our Facebook group, our Discord server, and an extra show every month, as well as some other goodies if you're pledging at certain levels. Of course, not everybody's able to support the show financially, so the number one way you can support the show not financially is just by subscribing, rating, and reviewing us in iTunes, giving us a 5-star review specifically. And we have a review this week to read from Ariel Brandon, and the review is titled, "But Really, What Have I Been Doing?" So Ariel says, "I started listening to the Real Weird Sisters about 2 years ago while at the gym and on my long work commute. I quickly binged all the episodes, and since then I've been faithfully listening every week. So this review is long overdue, and honestly, I don't know what I've been doing. Alice and Martha help feed my love for the Harry Potter universe, always while being accurate, thoughtful, and critical of the texts. Listening to their humor and banter makes me feel like I'm enjoying a phone call with friends, and I find myself laughing out loud at least once per episode. I also want to thank Alice and Martha for being socially conscious and good allies. Keep up the good work." Well, thank you. Glad to know that we make you laugh at least once, hopefully more than once. But that felt like maybe they were like, I laugh every time, and then it was like, well, maybe not every time, but at least once per episode.
Once per episode that they laugh. So that's better than 0 per episode.
It's true. I
don't know. Some of these serious episodes, like I said, there wasn't a lot of humor. So I don't know how much laughing there was. Maybe until this one with the Tonks plot.
Well, and hello, St. Nicholas. Have you heard? Harry Potter's godfather's been murdered. Yes. Thank you for the nice review in conclusion. Next week, we have a very interesting character study, and probably not a ton of humor in this one either. We're going to be talking about Frank Bryce. Alice, are you excited?
I am very excited. I think it's going to be kind of fun to go back to a more minor character.
All right, this is the sound of me digging a bunch of earwax out of my ear. Are you excited? I can't tell. I think I misheard you.
I'm a little worried it's going to be depressing, but I think we're going to find a lot to talk about, even though he's a minor character. This should be a fun one.
Definitely. So until next time, we're the Real Weird Sisters.
We're the Weird Sisters, we're the Real Weird Sisters. All you other weird sisters are fine, we're not the victors. We're the Real Weird Sisters. Please stand up. Please stand up. Please stand up.
Summer's here, and it's time to treat yourself at Torrid. Whether you're headed to a barbecue or back to work, Torrid has it all for summer and beyond. Shop our life-changing bras, sexy swimwear, bombshell jeans, and softest tees ever. All designed to fit your curves perfectly. So refresh your wardrobe from head to toe and save up to 50% off during our semi-annual sale. Happening now at your local Torrid store and online at torrid.com.
Today's podcast is brought to you by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get fresh, pre-measured ingredients and mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. And that's why it's America's #1 meal kit.
You've heard us mention Green Chef on the show before as well, and today we're talking about HelloFresh. HelloFresh owns Green Chef, which allows them to offer a wider array of meal plans to choose from. We both love switching between HelloFresh and Green Chef when we're in the mood for something different or a taste change.
HelloFresh offers 27-plus recipes to choose from each week, from vegetarian meals and calorie-smart choices to craft burgers and extra special gourmet options. There's something for everyone to enjoy, with all recipes designed and tested by professional chefs and nutritional experts to ensure deliciousness and simplicity.
One of my personal favorite parts of HelloFresh is that it cuts out stressful meal planning and grocery store trips, so I can enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in just about 30 minutes. Working full-time and running the podcast keeps me super busy, so I'm looking for every way I can to simplify my life.
HelloFresh is the first carbon-neutral meal kit, offsetting 100% of carbon emissions. As a result, HelloFresh's carbon footprint is 25% lower than store-bought grocery-made meals. So by skipping the grocery store and using HelloFresh, you're reducing your food waste by at least 25%.
HelloFresh offers the flexibility that you need with customizable orders every week. You can add extra proteins and sides, change up the serving size when you have guests, or just double up on your favorite recipes so your box works harder for you. You can easily change your delivery days or food preferences and skip a week whenever you need.
So go to HelloFresh.com/RealWeird12 and use the code RealWeird12 for 12 free meals, including free shipping.
Again, go to HelloFresh.com/RealWeird12 and use code RealWeird12 for 12 free meals, including free shipping. Lots of things can make your workouts hard. Extra resistance, double speed, one more mile. Your socks shouldn't, though. That's why Bombas Performance Socks are built to be nothing but comfortable and supportive.
Bombas Performance Socks have taken all the amazing innovations that make Bombas the most comfortable socks you've ever worn and added their special Hex-Tech performance technology.
Bombas Performance Socks are stitched with special moisture-wicking yarn and temperature-regulating vents that allow cool air to flow in and prevent overheating.
They come with a pillow-like tab to save you from blisters, stay-up technology, a special arch-hugging system, and an extra layer of cushiony comfort on the bottom for the perfect amount of support.
They also come in different styles for every sport, with specific design features to help you optimize performance and keep you comfortable no matter what you're doing.
And like all their socks, for every pair of Bombas Performance Socks you buy, they donate a pair to someone in need. They've donated over 45 million pairs so far.
I know this isn't the first time that I've raved about Bombas socks on the show. I'm super obsessed with Bombas socks to the point that I now basically refuse to wear any other socks unless I absolutely have to. They're so comfortable and cute, and I have a whole bunch of different styles, so I wear them, absolutely every time that I wear socks. And just depending on the type of shoes and activity that I'm doing, I switch them up to wear all the different types of styles. So I love Bombas socks, and I know you will too.
Hey, Alice, do you think that the sock that Dobby got in Chamber of Secrets was a Bombas sock?
Based on how much he loved it, I'm guessing yes.
Yes, and I'm surprised, Tim, you didn't have a joke to say about the hex technology because, hexing is kind of like what another witch does in another series.
Well, I mean, I of course know that in the Harry Potter universe, hex isn't really it. I mean, are there hexes in
yes, the
Harry Potter?
The Bat Bogey hex.
Oh, that's
Ginny's
right.
signature spell.
Yeah, Ginny's pretty good at that. I wonder if she wears Bombas socks as well.
She would. She likes the Bat Bogey hex technology that the Bombas socks have. But I also love my Bombas socks, and we have a special offer for listeners today. Go to bombas.com/realweird today and get 20% off your first order.
That's BOMBAS. Bombas.com/realweird for 20% off. bombas.com/realweird.
Introducing Peacock, the new free streaming service from NBC Universal. It's hit movies, current shows, live sports, trending bits, and timeless hits. And that's why you can't not watch. Peacock. Watch for free. Upgrade for more. Stream now at peacocktv.com. Law & Order SVU streaming now.
Keep up with Team USA with gig speeds over Wi-Fi from Xfinity. Can your internet do that?
Restrictions apply. Not available in all areas. Requires gig internet and compatible gateway. Gig speed Wi-Fi is shareable across all devices. Actual speeds vary and are not guaranteed.
Xfinity, proud partner of Team USA.